Now we're going to talk about the connective tissue, and this tissue to me is fascinating. So, on one hand, here you see something that looks relatively like a tissue. However, if you see here, this doesn't look like a tissue. This looks more like if you take the trunk of a tree and you cut it in a transparent way, and this is you can see the rings of a tree here. Yeah. So, but this is actually your bones. Here you have a tissue that is fluid, yeah, that is all the cells are moving. So this tissue is fascinating because it has so many different functions and it has so much variability to so all the things that we have learned about tissue here you will say, okay, from a very general perspective, these all of these type of tissues belong to this. So let's start and hopefully you get excited as I am excited to talk about the connective tissue. So now to start, I'm going to give you the outline of the class. And in the beginning, I'm going to talk about the different type of connective tissue, the location and their function. So here, for example, these are examples of connective tissue. So from a very general perspective, the first thing that you need to remember is that, as I said before, there is a lot of variations. Yeah. And later, I will talk about the extracellular matrix, and then I will talk about the different cell types. Yeah, what are the immature cell types? What are the adult cell types? And then I will go and try to show you a classification. Yeah, so I told you that there is so many types. So how we classify them, and from a again very general perspective, I want that you remember there are two types here. The first one, the embryonic tissue, and here the other type is the mature connective tissue. And in the mature connective tissue, we will talk about so many different types that I will have another schematic for you, another diagram that try to simplify things, but there are a lot. Okay, so let's start with the first part. So let's start with the introduction. To start talking about the connective tissue, I want you to think where is located the connective tissue? Yeah, where you can find it. So the connective tissue is located almost everywhere. Why? Because it is located in the bones, it's located in the blood, and if you remember, the skin and the muscles, they are connecting each other. Why? Because in between them you find a glue that is the connective tissue, and there are so many more examples. So remember, the connective tissue is one of the most common tissue types, and I already told you about these examples, and there are more examples, and all of them are specialized connective tissues that have specialized cells that we will talk about that, and they have a unique substance that allows them to have a unique properties and unique functions. And generally, going to tell you the functions in a second, but please remember that we also are going to cover this one that is very important, the ECM, the extracellular matrix. You have here about the bones, the blood, but sometimes you have here about the ECM, and this is very important. So the following are some functions. You have the function of binding. So for example, the ECM, that is found in between the extracellular matrix, that is between the epithelium in your skin and the muscles. You can also find support and protection in the bones. Yeah, that is clear. Also, you can find the function of transportation that it can be found in the blood. Yeah, and these are very general functions. You can find more functions in your textbook, and later we will talk about more. And there are, for example, the adipose tissue here is very important for energy storage and release. So if you get fat, like me, means because you have a lot of energy stored in that place. Yeah, in case that you need energy, it will be there. In addition to that, we have other type of connective tissues like the cartilage that we will talk about later. Let me write it here. So we will talk about that. That is as it has this property that is flexible, but at the same time, it's a strong connective tissue. It's very good at reducing friction, working as a shock absorber. And there are so many other examples. I just wanted to tell you that the connective tissue is this wide variety of tissues that have an incredible amount of different functions. Now we're going to talk about the structural characteristics of the different type of connective tissues, and there are three main structural characteristics. The first one are cells, the second one are fibers, and the third one are intercellular components, or they are also called ground substance. So let's start talking about each one of those. And again, this is for different type of connective tissue. So there will be different cells, there will be different fibers, and there will be different intercellular components. I'm just going to give you some examples. So the first example that I'm going to give you is this one. Here, they're in a stroma cell. Here you will find uh, this fibroblast, and again, this blast means immature. Yeah, so later we will talk about many blasts, and I want that you compare these green cells that are epithelial cells to the blue cells. Okay, so let's think about the difference. So you find here that these cells have junctions and they form layers and they are attached to each other. Here, if you see these cells, they don't have those junctions in that way. They are not attached to other cells. This one seems to be isolated, yeah. And so here, if you remember, there is not also apical and basal polarity, yeah. Oh, sorry. In in the epithelial there is apical and basal polarity, but here this apical and basal polarity is not here. Yeah, you have different proteins on the top or the bottom. So I just told you that the cells in the stroma, yeah, in the extracellular matrix, they will have a lot of difference. I told you that the apical basal polarity is not there in most of the cases, or it will be different. That they seems to be, well, the epithelial form layers here, the junctions will be different. Yeah, they will not be forming these layers similar to those found in the epithelium. And there are many other characteristics. Yeah, for example, here in the epithelia, we don't have vascular tissue, we have blood vessels, and the terminal and the endings of nerves will be just here in some regions in the mechanoreceptor organ. However, in the extracellular matrix, you have a lot of blood vessels, yeah, and you have also nerves. And there are two exceptions, there are the tendons and the cartilage. Okay, so I talk a lot about the cells, yeah, and I show you an example of a cell that I was the fibroblast. Now I'm going to tell you the last thing about the cells is that they are relatively fewer number compared to the epithelium. So there is a lot of difference here. Now let's move to the fibers. And here, let me show you. Here there are some examples of fibers, yeah? So you will be talking a lot about collagen, a lot about different type of proteins like fibronectin, proteoglycans. Yeah, they are different types, and depending on the tissue, they will be different. And if you see, here I have some arrows. These arrows are showing that the fibers are here. Yeah, and yeah, all these green fibers are there. And what I'm trying to show there is that these are not cellular proteins. Yeah, they are not proteins that are inside of the cells. They can be secreted by the cells, and they can be repaired by the cells, but they are not inside of the cells. Okay, so that is very important. Now, finally, the last component. So first one were cells, Second was fibers, that those fibers, they were not inside of the cell, they were outside. Now we're going to talk about the intercellular component, that is they call the ground substance. And I want to make a difference. So intercellular, it will be the ones, let's put it in red, intercellular will be here. Yeah, in between cells. Intra will be inside. Intra will be here. Inter, the one in red that we are talking here, it will be in between the cells. So it will be all the things that are surrounding the cells. And this again is, it can some of those components will be secreted by the cells of the extracellular matrix. And if you take the cancer biology course, you will see that many of those components during cancer, the cancer is able to trick the cells to make the wrong components and to be able to produce more growth in the tumors. Okay, so we talk about three main components: cells, fibers, and intercellular components, or ground substance. And the ground substance is an amorphous substance. Sorry, I forgot. Yeah, in this case, the stromal matrix, and that in some cases could be transparent, and it has a viscous property, or like a gel thing structure. Okay, so a lot of information. Hopefully it was clear. If you have any question, let me know. In this slide, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the cells that form the connective tissue. And there are two types of cells that I want that you remember. In the immature stage, you have these cells that end up in the with the word blast. Yeah, that it means that they are involved in building or in originating something. Yeah, so this is very simple. Here, the bone cells are osteoblasts. The cells of the that are in the connective tissue that produce collagen are called fibroblasts. Yeah, so they are in the ECM. Let me delete this. So let's put it in correctly. So the ECM cells, the adipoblasts are the ones that are in the adipose tissue, and the chondroblasts are the ones that are in the cartilage. Finally, the erythroblasts are the ones that are in the bone marrow. Those ones later will become the erythrocytes, that are the ones that are attaching the hemoglobin. Okay, so remember, all these cells come from an undifferentiated mesenchymal cells, and the mesenchymal cells come from these germ layers, the cells that originate, ectoderm, mesoderm, and endoderm. Yeah, all these that produce all the cells in the early stages, or that produce all the stem cells that are undifferentiated. Yeah, they form mesenchymal cells, and all these mesenchymal cells will end up forming all these different type of connective tissue cells. And remember, this is very important, as they are young. Yeah, they're immature. They are active metabolically and mitotically, and this is very important because this allows them to repair parts of the tissue. In addition, they secrete, or so they are in charge of building the matrix. Yeah, so while the mature cells will only maintain the matrix, this one will build and repair the matrix. Now I'm going to talk about the mature cells. And again, remember, they were undifferentiated cells. They became blasts, and then they became cytes. And main difference is the ending of the word. And yeah, that they will be, instead of being chondroblasts, they will be chondrocytes. So the main difference here is not only the name, but also that they decrease the metabolic activity. Second thing, that for us is easier just to remember that they finish they have the ending, it will be site, so it will be easier for you for the test. And remember, they are not forming or building the matrix or repairing it, they are maintaining it. Yeah, so they don't secrete as much. For that reason, they have a lower metabolic activity. Okay, so we finished. I told you a little bit more about the cells. Now I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the fibers, and I'm going to show you a picture of the extracellular matrix. So in your textbook, they show you this picture of the extracellular matrix, and you can find more information there. And I'm not going to get this too complicated, but if you want to know more about this, in cancer biology and in cell biology, we talk about this. Here, what they are showing you is that in the extracellular matrix, you have a lot of cells and a lot of fibers. So for example, immune cells like macrophages are there, and they are the first line of defense against infection. So when the infection comes from bacteria or virus, they come from the skin many times, or from the air, they cross an epithelium, and what they found, the connective tissue. And the first line of defense will be one of these immune cells, and there are different types. Here you have one of the most important proteins found in the extracellular matrix. Here the lines, blue lines here to represent the collagen that is secreted by our friend the fibroblast, that is the green cells here. So fibroblasts secrete collagen proteins, and those proteins help to maintain the structural framework of tissues. And you have many more fibers, like elastic fiber, reticular fibers, and in cancer biology and cell biology, we go in more detail about this. However, I want that you remember that this word fibroblast. Why? Because it's the most common cell type in the connective tissue, although they are not present in the blood and in the lymph. In addition to that, you have many more cells. So for example, these mast cells are there, and you will find even more cell types. However, to not get things more complicated, remember, keyword here, fibroblasts, that they are the most common type of cells of the connective tissue, and they are not found in the blood or the lymph. But in the other ones, you find it, and they are secreting a lot of the protein collagen that is very important. Now let's move to the third component, and I'm going to tell you more about the intercellular or ground substance in the connective tissue. In this schematic, you can see the ground substance, and you can see that it is surrounded by collagen fibers. There are other fibers, and here you will find, for example, a macrophage, a mast cell, and also our friend the fibroblast, and all those cells will be secreting different proteins, different molecules, and those molecules will form the ground substance. And cells and fibers will be embedded inside of this intercellular material, and it's a yellow-like material that is amorphous. And if you see, the cells are building their own cellular environment. What is fascinating. So I don't want to make your life more complicated, just tell you that you can I just wanted to tell you that there is a lot of proteins and molecules in that ground substance, and you can check in the textbook and in the practice test. uh, some of these, the most important, could be involved there. So for example, you have protoglycans. Yeah, you have these uh, GAG molecules, and this one is the most important, that you can even find. You can see it in the picture. That is the hyaluronic acid. Keratin, it will be important, keratin sulfate, and we talked about that previously. And fibronectin, laminin are also very important. Okay, so to summarize, I told you two key ideas that I hope that you remember: that the extracellular substance secreted by the cells, and it is located between the connective tissue cells, so they create their own environment. In addition to that, this ground substance is the background material within which all cells of the connective tissue are embedded. Okay, so that is the key. Now I'm going to show you some difference between the connective tissue intercellular ground substance. I tried to simplify this intercellular ground substance, and however, yes, the connective tissues has so many different types. There is a lot of difference in the consistency of the connective tissue. So you can go from fluids to solid. Yeah, fluids it will be the blood and the lymph, while in solids we have the bones that are calcified. And you can also have semi-fluids or gels. And in addition to that, in the intercellular ground substance can also have different functions. So it can be support and bind cells. Yeah, and it can work as a support and bind cells in the extracellular matrix, but in the blood it can be in charge of uh, transport the nutrients and waste materials, and in other ones it can be in charge of form the extracellular fluids of the connective tissue. Okay, so this is the third again component. There were cells, there were fibers, and now we finished with the intercellular components. Now I'm going to show you a schematic of your textbook that you can study for later because it has a lot of information. Here, what I wanted to show you is a schematic that you can use to study from your textbook. And I try to do my best to summarize this, but this topic is so complex that there is even more things to study. So for example, we talk about fibroblasts and collagen fibers, but I just show you something about the mast cell that you can read here if you want to know more about it. I didn't talk about other type of cells. Yeah, I told you a little bit about the adipocytes. So there is still a lot of information that you can get from your textbook. So go and give a read so you have a better picture of this chapter. At this point, you should be familiar with the different type of connective tissues that go from liquid structures, that are in the blood to almost solid structures in the bones. And you should know that there are, independent of this huge variation, you have three key structural components that are cells, fibers, and also the intercellular substance or ground substance. And now we're going to move into the classification. And in the classification, we will talk about two main categories. That is the embryonic, and then we will move into the mature connective tissue. And in the mature connective tissue, you will find a lot of groups. Okay, so I'm going to stop the video here, and later I will start with the classification.